What's up guys, Kyle here again, and welcome back to another episode of FAQ'N Friday. I'm not sure why my voice keeps getting higher. What's going on? First question! Bucket Feet asks, hey Kyle, love the content on your channel. Do you own any ESP or E2 guitars, non-LTD? Also, do you use any active pickups? Would be cool to hear with your amp demos. Thanks. Okay guys, so I initially read this wrong and had this whole bit where I was gonna talk about how I don't like LTD guitars while showing you all the LTD guitars that I own. So yeah, I'm now realizing that I'm an idiot and reading comprehension is not my strong suit. So I literally have all of my LTD and ESP guitars stacked beside me in a pile. So I'm just gonna show you those anyways. There you go. So now that that gag was completely ruined by my lack of reading comprehension skills, yes, I do own an ESP Eclipse from sometime in the universe. And this guitar does actually have EMG retro actives in it. It's got the Hot 70 set, which are truly the only active pickups that I've really fallen in love with. And the only thing that's really active about them is they have like the noise and the hum cancellation that comes in most of the EMG preamps. But really, these are just kind of like a hot PAF type of pickup. They don't really have any sort of active characteristics where there's a lot of compression and a lot of extra output or anything like that. These are what you would probably consider mid-output pickups, but I really enjoy these. Now, I do own a bunch of guitars that have active pickups. Most of them are either LTD or Schecters. I am not a huge fan of them, but I will absolutely use some guitars with active pickups if you guys want to see some stuff like that in the future. I'm trying to get back to rotating different guitars into the videos as opposed to playing the same guitar. Figure out some new ways to do my demos where I can work in more guitars. I know that you guys really like me kind of dialing everything in from noon, but if I can streamline that process and allow for a little bit more time where I can experiment with a different guitar and then do my drop C thing, that's something that I'd really like to do because a lot of people do ask me if I can kind of demo these amps with active pickups on top of the passive stuff that I usually use. So I definitely want to try to figure out how to work that in the future. If you guys have any suggestions, you know what to do. Leave them down in the comments. But yeah, anyways, this ESP, this is one of my favorite guitars. This is, I actually got a really good deal on this last year and it sat without pickups for quite a long time. I actually probably let this guitar sit with no pickups in it for a year because it had EMGs in it. I'm not a fan of EMGs. I yanked them out. I sold them. I was going to strip the whole inner cavity of this guitar, redo all of the electronics, but I tend to take on way more than I'm capable of completing. So that's essentially what happened, and it just sat. And then I got a Schecter Sun Valley Super Shredder that has the EMG retroactives in it as well. And I was really genuinely impressed with how good that guitar sounded with those pickups in it. So I ended up buying a set and putting them in this guitar, and honestly, I have been super happy with it ever since. ESPs and E2s, they are the most consistent guitars that I've ever played. Now, they're not the best guitars that I've ever played because I would still pick up one of my good Gibsons over one of these guitars. That's just my personal preference. But I have not played a bad ESP, and I've probably owned 15 of these things over the last 5 years or so. I have not played one that played bad or sounded bad. In fact, they all feel almost identical in my hands. Most of them have been Eclipses. I had one Viper and I had one E2. Both of those were awesome as well, but the vast majority have been the E2 or the ESP Eclipse 2 model, same as this right here, but most of them were vintage black. They all felt like identical in my hands. It was crazy. Like every time I pick one up now, I know exactly how it's going to feel. And it's nuts to me that they're that consistent across. I've had all sorts of different years. Obviously, the E2 stuff is newer as well. So their consistency in my experience has been second to none. So that is definitely one strong thing that I will say about ESP. And when their guitars are good, they are really good. And all of the ESP stuff that I have played has been really good. I've played a lot of LTDs. I own a lot of LTDs that have been amazing, and then I've owned a lot that have kind of bummed me out or left me wanting or feeling a little bit disappointed. So the ones that I have now are all really good. I've kind of weeded out all the ones that I was unimpressed with. But yeah, I am definitely a fan of the ESP stuff. You guys have seen this guitar a few times on the channel. I'll start working it in a little bit more as well. Question number 2. Clint asks, what are your thoughts on running a cable from the FX send of one amp and putting it into the FX return of a different amp for different tones, i.e. preamp from amp A mixed with power amp from amp B. Cheers. Thanks for your question, Clint. So there is one thing that you need to keep in mind when doing this, and that is you have to have a load on whatever amp that you're sending the preamp signal out of, or you're going to blow that thing up, unless it's solid state. Please keep that in mind. Otherwise, I don't think that this is the most practical way. This is what this is called slaving amps. So you're slaving the preamp into the power amp section of another amp. I have absolutely experimented with this in the past, and there is actually a better way to do it. Most amps, not all of them, but most amps do have like a preamp out of some sort on the back. At least a lot of the ones that I have messed with. The 5150 here has one. So if you want to mess around with slaving the preamp out into a different power section, like slaving a 5150 preamp into a Marshall power section, you can absolutely do that by running a cable from the preamp out into the Marshall's effects return. But you're also going to have to balance the volumes, because the volume that the 5150 puts out of the preamp section is directly related to the level of volume on the amp in the front. So it's going to be coming louder through the first cab that you have it hooked up into. The more you turn it up and send more signal into the Marshall. So balancing the volume sometimes is tricky if you don't have a master volume amp. But yeah, long story short, I have absolutely done this. I've done it a bunch. I actually had a 6505 Plus, and I bought a Windsor and slaved the 6505 Plus into the Windsor. The Windsor did not have a master volume, so it was really tricky to try and get the volumes to match up. But what I ended up doing was just buying a cheap 6-band EQ pedal and putting it in between the two amps so that I could control the level on the 6-band EQ of the preamp signal that the 5150 was sending into the Windsor. It actually sounded really good going through the Windsor. I played a couple shows like that and had a couple people come up to me and ask me what the hell was going on with my setup, because they're like, I have never ever heard a Windsor sound anything like that. So I told them, well, I'm using the preamp out of the 5150 and putting it into the power section of the Windsor. So it gave the 5150 preamp more of an upper mid bite, because that Windsor power amp is voiced more like a Marshall power amp, and obviously it uses EL34 power tubes. So all in all, you got a brighter, more mid-present, more aggressive sounding power amp coloration to the 5150 preamp. And with that 6-band EQ, you could use that as your overall volume. So once you got your 5150 volume, you could use the EQ to get the Windsor to a similar volume, so one's not drowning the other out. But yeah, man, all the time. I'm actually going to do a video on slaving amps here very, very soon. I'm going to show you what the SLO sounds like, and then slave it into a dual rectifier power section, and then slave it into a 5150 power section, so you guys can actually see how much difference there is between those three amps. Anyways, that is how I'm going to introduce you guys to slaving power amps. I will have that video out within the next couple of weeks, and you guys should look for that, because it's going to be a fun time. And here goes my voice again. It's taking off! Question number 3 comes from Alan Butler. Question: I got a HX Stomp. Sorry, I had to. Especially for the new Rev models, can't afford the real thing and like it. I use the preamp only into the loop return of my Laney IRT60 with my Jesus Demon 212, and was pleasantly surprised with how good that worked. I recently watched your Helix and Rev 100p reviews and wondered if you checked out the Rev models, what you thought, etc. Thank you for your question, Alan. I actually have checked out the Rev models on the Pod Go that I have, and I think that they are really, really well done. Now, I'm pretty sure that Rev actually worked with Line 6 in order to get the modeling correct here, because they are actually labeled as the Rev models, which means that Rev licensed their name and probably their amp models to Line 6 in some way. I'm not 100% sure how that works, but I know Line 6 can't use the Rev name without the Rev blessing. So I'm assuming that they work together to make those amp models, and I can tell you that they sound extremely true to form. One thing that I have found about the Rev amps themselves is they have a very unique power amp voicing on top of the preamp voicing. So I recently plugged a couple different preamp pedals into the power section of my Rev Generator Mark III. Honestly, I could hear that Rev power amp voicing in every single one of those preamp pedals that I did. It's not like a 5150 power amp voicing where it's pretty transparent, it's clear. Like there's a signature sound to that Rev power amp for sure. But otherwise, if you were to take the Rev models in the HX Stomp or the Pod Go, and you were to put them into either a clean solid state power amp or through a clean tube power amp, yeah, they're going to get you real close to how those Rev amps sound. They did a fantastic job of modeling those, just like Rev did a fantastic job of capturing the sound of their amps and their G3 and G4 pedals. So I like that Rev is not only releasing their own preamp pedals, but working with other companies in order to make sure that they get the voicing of their amps right and give a proper representation of how their amps should sound in these modelers, because that gives you guys the Rev sound. Now they have a specific feel, but you get a really close approximation of the Rev sound out of the HX Stomp and Podgo and the Helix. They did a great job on those, and I can say that they're pretty accurate to the amp themselves. Now, nothing compares to playing an amp through a 4x12 cabinet at a loud volume, but at the same time, if you were to try and record that and you wanted to record the Rev tone, that Podgo is going to get you probably 95% of the way there. It's really close. So as long as you're using a good cabinet IR, then you should be gravy, man. If you want those Rev tones, they are in that HX Stomp. All right, guys, last question comes from Neji H, back again. No Harry Canyon this week. I'm a little disappointed. Harry Canyon has left the chat. Hope to see you again next week, man. You're always bringing the great questions. You're always bringing the great questions, but so is Neji H. He's always dropping some good questions. So he asks, hey, Kyle, my band has been given the opportunity to record some stuff in a local studio for free, and they have a very sweet JCM 800. As we play in standard B, and I've been told those Marshalls don't have that much gain, would my MXR Vintage OD be enough for high gain? Also, which cab speaker would be a good pair with that amp? All right, thanks for your question, my man. And as I replied to you down in the comments, do not use that amp for drop B or B standard. It's just not gonna work in its stock form, man. I have touched on this a number of times on my channel. The Marshall JCM 800 is commonly misconstrued as everybody refers to it as the first metal amp, and it is. It absolutely is that. There is no doubt about it. But when we're talking the first metal amp, we're talking like early 80s metal that does not have a lot of saturation, is pretty dry. If you guys want to look at a JCM 800 tone, listen to early Slayer stuff. And even though Kerry King used not only a TS9, but a 10-band EQ to boost the front end of the amp all to hell, he still doesn't have a very saturated tone. And that is because the JCM 800 is not nearly as high gain as a lot of people think that it is, or as a lot of people on the internet would lead you to believe that it is. Now, if you want to add some actual clipping from your overdrive pedal, yeah, that'll get it closer. But again, it's still not quite going to be there for the modern levels of high gain that people are expecting out of the amp. Like, it doesn't come anywhere close to a 5150. It doesn't come anywhere close to a rectifier in terms of overall gain and saturation. And also, the low end, people describe it as tight, but there's a very particular low end, like low mid frequency in Marshalls that sounds kind of like round or a little bit boxy in my opinion. And it is really hard to get rid of that without sucking all the low end out of the amp. So it just, in my opinion, sure, you could probably get away with using that amp for low tune modern stuff. But is it going to be the best choice? No, not by far, man. Like, you should definitely try to use something like a 5150. I'm not saying like stick inside the lines. You can absolutely try it. I just don't think that you're going to get the results that you want. It's not a very high gain amp unless you double boost it and really play with the EQ, especially after it's been recorded. You're probably not going to be happy with the results. So that would be my suggestion. Just don't use it. Use a different amp. Or if it's one of the models that has an effects loop, you can use the effects loop and use a preamp in if you want to say that you used a JCM 800 in some way. But in my opinion, the juice is not going to be worth the squeeze on that one. And there are much better options for the type of stuff that you guys are going for. With that being said, I got a Marshall right here and I absolutely love it. So I am by no means talking down on the 2203 or 2204 circuits. I absolutely love them. They're actually one of my favorite amps. But they just don't work for the modern stuff, in my opinion, unless you really doctor the hell out of them. So hope that helps, man. Hope that you are able to achieve a tone that you're happy with in the studio. And my advice would be use something else. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks again so much for watching. For next week, put your questions down in the comments. I got it right. Put your questions down in the comments. I can't believe I finally said it right. And I will get to them next week. Thank you guys so much for being here and dropping those awesome questions. I really enjoy engaging with you guys. Like I always say, happy to have you here. Down in the description of this video is my Sweetwater affiliate link. You go down there and you click on that link, get yourself something nice from the fine folks at Sweetwater. I get a little kickback. It helps my channel grow and helps me out greatly. or consider becoming a member of my Patreon and helping to support the channel that way. You can also become a member of the Belligerent Amateur community by joining my Discord server and my Facebook group down below. Appreciate you guys as always. Kyle here again. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.